Chapter 33 of Dombey and Son. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Lyons. Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. Chapter 33. Contrasts. Turn we our eyes upon two homes, not lying side by side, but wide apart, though both within easy range and reach of the great city of London. The first is situated in the green and wooded country near Norwood. It is not a mansion. It is of no pretension as to size, but it is beautifully arranged and tastefully kept. The lawn, the soft, smooth slope, the flower garden, the clumps of trees where graceful forms of ash and willow are not wanting, the conservatory, the rustic veranda with sweet-smelling, creeping plants entwined about the pillars, the simple exterior of the house, the well-ordered offices, though all upon the diminutive scale proper to a mere cottage, bespeak an amount of elegant comfort within that might serve for a palace. This indication is not without warrant, for within it is a house of refinement and luxury. Rich colours, excellently blended, meet the eye at every turn, in the furniture, its proportions admirably devised to suit the shapes and sizes of the small rooms, on the walls, upon the floors, tinging and subduing the light that comes in through the odd glass doors and windows here and there. There are a few choice prints and pictures, too, in quaint nooks and recesses. There is no want of books, and there are games of skill and chance set forth on tables, fantastic chessmen, dice, backgammon, cards, and billiards. And yet, amidst this opulence of comfort, there is something in the general air that is not well. Is it that the carpets and the cushions are too soft and noiseless, so that those who move or repose among them seem to act by stealth? Is it that the prints and pictures do not commemorate great thoughts or deeds, or render nature in the poetry of landscape, hall, or hut, but are of one voluptuous cast, mere shows of form and colour and no more? Is it that the books have all their gold outside, and that the titles of the greater part qualify them to be companions of the prints and pictures? Is it that the completeness and the beauty of the place are here and there belied by an affectation of humility in some unimportant, inexpensive regard, which is as false as the face of the too truly painted portrait hanging yonder, or its original at breakfast in his easy chair below it? Or is it that, with the daily breath of that original and master of all here, there issues forth some subtle portion of himself, which gives a vague expression of himself to everything about him? It is Mr. Carker the manager who sits in the easy chair. A gaudy parrot in a burnished cage upon the table tears at the wires with her beak and goes walking upside down in its dome top, shaking her house and screeching, but Mr. Carker is indifferent to the bird, and looks with a musing smile at a picture on the opposite wall. "A most extraordinary accidental likeness, certainly," says he. "Perhaps it is a Juno, perhaps a Potiphar's wife, perhaps some scornful nymph, according as the picture dealers found the market when they christened it. It is the figure of a woman, supremely handsome, who, turning away, but with her face addressed to the spectator, flashes her proud glance upon him. It is like Edith. with a passing gesture of his hand at the picture. What? A menace? No, yet something like it. A wave as of triumph? No, yet more like that. An insolent salute wafted from his lips? No, not yet like that too. He resumes his breakfast and calls to the chafing and imprisoned bird, who, coming down into a pendant gilded hoop within the cage, like a great wedding ring, swings in it for his delight. The second home is on the other side of London, near to where the busy Great North Road of bygone days is silent and almost deserted, except by wayfarers who toil along on foot. It is a poor small house, barely and sparsely furnished, but very clean, and there is even an attempt to decorate it, shown in the homely flowers trained about the porch and in the narrow garden. The neighbourhood in which it stands has as little of the country to recommend it as it has of the town. It is neither of the town nor country. The former, like the giant in his travelling boots, has made a stride and passed it, and has set his brick and mortar heel a long way in advance. But the intermediate space between the giant's feet, as yet, is only blighted country, and not town, and here, among the few tall chimneys belching smoke all day and night, and among the brick fields and the lanes where turf is cut, and where the fences tumble down, and where the dusty nettles grow, and where a scrap or two of hedge may yet be seen, and where the bird-catcher still comes occasionally, though he swears every time to come no more, this second home is to be found. She who inhabits it is she who left the first in her devotion to an outcast brother. She withdrew from that home its redeeming spirit, and from its master's breast his solitary angel. But though his liking her is gone, after this ungrateful slight, as he considers it, and though he abandons her altogether in return, an old idea of her is not quite forgotten even by him. Let her flower garden, in which he never sets his foot, but which is yet maintained, among all his costly alterations, as if she had quitted it but yesterday, bear witness. Harriet Carker has changed since then, and on her beauty there has fallen a heavier shade than time of his unassisted self can cast, all potent as he is, the shadow of anxiety and sorrow, and the daily struggle of a poor existence. But it is beauty still, and still a gentle, quiet, and retiring beauty that must be sought out, for it cannot vaunt itself. If it could, it would be what it is, no more. Yes, this slight, small, patient figure, neatly dressed in homely stuffs, and indicating nothing but the dull household virtues that have so little in common with the received idea of heroism and greatness, unless, indeed, any ray of them should shine through the lives of the great ones of the earth, when it becomes a constellation and is tracked in heaven straightway. This slight, small, patient figure, leaning on the man still young but worn and grey, is she, his sister, who, of all the world, went over to him in his shame, and put her hand in his, and with a sweet composure and determination led him hopefully upon his barren way. "It is early, John," she said. "Why do you go so early?" "Not many minutes earlier than usual, Harriet. If I have the time to spare, I should like, I think, It's a fancy, to walk once by the house where I took leave of him. I wish I had ever seen or known him, John. It is better as it is, my dear, remembering his fate. But I could not regret it more though I had known him. Is not your sorrow mine? And if I had, perhaps you would feel that I was a better companion to you in speaking about him than I may seem now. My dearest sister, is there anything within the range of rejoicing or regret in which I am not sure of your companionship? I hope you think not, John, for surely there is nothing. How could you be better to me or nearer to me then than you are in this or anything? Said her brother. I feel that you did know him, Harriet, and that you shared my feelings toward him. She drew the hand which had been resting on his shoulder round his neck, and answered with some hesitation, "No, not quite." "True, true," he said. "You think I might have done him no harm if I had allowed myself to know him better?" "Think! I know it." "Designedly. Heaven knows I would not," he replied, shaking his head mournfully. "But his reputation was too precious to be perilled by such association, whether you share that knowledge or do not, my dear." "I do not," she said quietly. "It is still the truth, Harriet, and my mind is lighter when I think of him for that which made it so much heavier then." He checked himself in his tone of melancholy, and smiled upon her as he said, "Good-bye." "Good-bye, dear John. In the evening, at the old time and place, I shall meet you as usual on your way home. Good-bye." The cordial face she lifted up to his to kiss him was his home, his life, his universe, and yet it was a portion of his punishment and grief, for in the cloud he saw upon it, though serene and calm as any radiant cloud at sunset, and in the constancy and devotion of her life, and in the sacrifice she had made of ease, enjoyment, and hope, he saw the bitter fruits of his old crime, for ever ripe and fresh. She stood at the door looking after him, with her hands loosely clasped in each other, as he made his way over the frowsy and uneven patch of ground which lay before their home, which had once, and not very long ago, been a pleasant meadow, and was now a very waste, with a disorderly crop of beginnings of mean houses rising out of the rubbish, as if they had been unskilfully sown there. Whenever he looked back, as once or twice he did, her cordial face shone like a light upon his heart, but when he plodded on his way, and saw her not, the tears were in her eyes as she stood watching him. Her pensive form was not long idle at the door. There was daily duty to discharge and daily work to do, for such commonplace spirits that are not heroic often work hard with their hands, and Harriet was soon busy with her household tasks. These discharged, and the poor house made quite neat and orderly, she counted her little stock of money with an anxious face, and went out thoughtfully to buy some necessaries for their table, planning and contriving as she went how to save. So sordid are the lives of such low natures, who are not only not heroic to their valets and waiting women, but have neither valets nor waiting women to be heroic to withal. While she was absent, and there was no one in the house, there approached it by a different way from that of the brother had taken, a gentleman of very little past his prime of life perhaps, but of a healthy florid hue, an upright presence, and a bright clean aspect that was gracious and good-humoured. His eyebrows were still black, and so was much of his hair. The sprinkling of grey observable among the latter graced the former very much, and showed his broad frank brow and honest eyes to great advantage. After knocking once at the door and obtaining no response, this gentleman sat down on a bench in the little porch to wait. A certain skilful action of his fingers as he hummed some bars and beat time on the seat beside him seemed to denote the musician, and the extraordinary satisfaction he derived from humming something very slow and long, which had no recognizable tune, seemed to denote that he was a scientific one. The gentleman was still twirling a theme, which seemed to go round and round and round, and in and out and in, and to involve itself like a corkscrew twirled upon a table, without getting any nearer to anything, when Harriet appeared returning. He rose up as she advanced, and stood with his head uncovered. "You are come again, sir?" she said, faltering. "I take that liberty," he answered. "May I ask for 5 minutes of your leisure?" After a moment's hesitation, she opened the door and gave him admission to the little parlour. The gentleman sat down there, and drew his chair to the table over against her, and said, in a voice that perfectly corresponded to his appearance, and with a simplicity that was very engaging, "Miss Harriet, you cannot be proud. You signalled to me when I called the other morning that you were. Pardon me if I say that I looked into your face while you spoke, and that it contradicted you. I look into it again," he added, laying his hand gently on her arm for an instant, "and it contradicts you more and more." She was somewhat confused and agitated, and could make no ready answer. "It is the mirror of truth," said her visitor, "and gentleness. Excuse my trusting to it and returning." His manner of saying these words divested them entirely of the character of compliments. It was so plain, grave, unaffected, and sincere, that she bent her head, as if at once to thank him and acknowledge his sincerity. "The disparity between our ages," said the gentleman, "and the plainness of my purpose empower me, I am glad to think, to speak my mind. That is my mind, and so you see me for the second time." "There is a kind of pride, sir," she returned, after a moment's silence, "or what may be supposed to be pride, which is mere duty. I hope I cherish no other." "For yourself," he said. "For myself." "But, pardon me," suggested the gentleman, "for your brother John?" "Proud of his love I am," said Harriet, looking full upon her visitor, and changing her manner on the instant. Not that it was less composed and quiet, but that there was a deep impassioned earnestness in it that made the very tremble in her voice a part of her firmness. "And proud of him, sir, you, who are strangely know the story of his life, and repeated it to me when you were here last." "Merely to make my way into your confidence," interposed the gentleman. "For heaven's sake, don't suppose." "I am sure," she said, "you revived it in my hearing with a kind and good purpose. I am quite sure of it." "I thank you," returned her visitor, pressing her hand hastily. "I am much obliged to you. You do me justice, I assure you. You were going to say that I, who know the story of John Carker's life, may think it pride in me," she continued, "when I say that I am proud of him. I am. You know the time was when I was not, when I could not be. but that is past. The humility of many years, the uncomplaining expiation, the true repentance, the terrible regret, the pain I know he has even in my affection, which he thinks has cost me dear, though heaven knows I am happy but for his sorrows. Oh, sir, after what I have seen, let me conjure you, if you are in any place of power and are ever wronged, never for any wrong inflict a punishment that cannot be recalled, while there is a God above us to work changes in the hearts he made. Your brother is an altered man, returned the gentleman compassionately. I assure you I don't doubt it. He was an altered man when he did wrong, said Harriet. He is an altered man again, and is his true self now, believe me, sir. But we go on, said her visitor, rubbing his forehead in an absent manner with his hand, and then drumming thoughtfully on the table. We go on in our clockwork routine from day to day, and can't make out or follow these changes. They're a metaphysical sort of thing. We haven't leisure for it. We haven't courage. They're not taught at schools or colleges, and we don't know how to set about it. In short, we are so damn businesslike, said the gentleman, walking to the window and back, and sitting down again in a state of extreme dissatisfaction and vexation. I am sure, said the gentleman, rubbing his forehead again and drumming on the table as before, I have good reason to believe that a jog-trot life, the same from day to day, would reconcile one to anything. One don't see anything, one don't hear anything, one don't know anything, that's the fact. We go on taking everything for granted, and so we go on until whatever we do, good or bad or indifferent, we do from habit. Habit is all I shall have to report when I am called upon to plead to my conscience on my deathbed. Habit, says I. I was deaf, dumb, blind, and paralytic to a million things from habit. Very businesslike indeed. Mr. What's-your-name, says conscience, but it won't do here. The gentleman got up and walked to the window again and back, seriously uneasy, though giving his uneasiness this peculiar expression. Miss Harriet, he said, resuming his chair, I wish you would let me serve you. Look at me. I ought to look honest, for I know I am so at present. Do I? Yes, she answered with a smile. I believe every word you have said, he returned. I am full of self-reproach that I might have known this, and seen this, and known you and seen you any time these dozen years, and that I never have. I hardly know how I ever got here, creature that I am, not only of my own habit, but of other people's. But having done so, let me do something. I ask it in all honour and respect. You inspire me with both, in the highest degree. Let me do something. We are contented, sir. No, not quite, returned the gentleman. I think not quite. There are some little comforts that might smooth your life and his, he repeated, fancying that had made some impression on her. I have been in the habit of thinking that there was nothing wanting to be done for him, that it was all settled and over. In short, of not thinking at all about it. I am different now. Let me do something for him. You too, said the visitor, with careful delicacy, have need to watch your health closely for his sake, and I fear it fails. Whoever you may be, sir, answered Harriet, raising her eyes to his face, I am deeply grateful to you. I feel certain that in all you say you have no object in the world but kindness to us. But years have passed since we began this life, and to take from my brother any part of what has so endeared him to me, and so proved his better resolution, any fragment of the merit of his unassisted, obscure, and forgotten reparation, would be to diminish the comfort it will be to him and me, when that time comes to each of us of which you spoke just now. I thank you better with these tears than any words. Believe it, pray. The gentleman was moved, and put the hand she held out to his lips, much as a tender father might kiss the hand of a dutiful child, but more reverently. "If the day should ever come," said Harriet, "when he is restored in part to the position he lost—" "Restored!" cried the gentleman. "How can that be hoped for? In whose hands does the power of any restoration lie? It is no mistake of mine, surely, to suppose that his having gained the priceless blessing of his life is one cause of the animosity shown to him by his brother." "You touch upon a subject that is never breathed between us, not even between us," said Harriet. "I beg your forgiveness," said the visitor. "I should have known it. I entreat you to forget that I have done so inadvertently. And now, as I dare urge no more, as I am not sure that I have a right to do so, though, heaven knows, even that doubt may be habit," said the gentleman, rubbing his head as despondently as before, "let me, though a stranger, yet no stranger, ask 2 favours." "What are they?" she inquired. "The first, that if you should see cause to change your resolution, you will suffer me to be as your right hand. My name shall then be at your service. It is useless now, and always insignificant." "Our choice of friends," she answered, smiling faintly, "is not so great that I need any time for consideration. I can promise that. The second, that you will allow me sometimes, say every Monday morning at 9 o'clock, habit again. I must be businesslike," said the gentleman, with a whimsical inclination to quarrel with himself on that head, "in walking past to see you at the door or window. I don't ask to come in, as your brother will be gone out at that hour. I don't ask to speak to you. I merely ask to see you, for the satisfaction of my own mind, that you are well, and without intrusion to remind you, by the sight of me, that you have a friend, an elderly friend, grey-haired already, and fast growing greyer, whom you may ever command." The cordial face looked up in his, confided in it, and promised. "I understand, as before," said the gentleman, rising, "that you purpose not to mention my visit to John Carker, lest he should be at all distressed by my acquaintance with his history. I am glad of it, for it is out of the ordinary course of things. And habit again," said the gentleman, checking himself impatiently, as if there were no better course than the ordinary course. With that he turned to go, and walking bareheaded to the outside of the little porch, took leave of her with such a happy mixture of unconstrained respect and unaffected interest as no breeding could have taught, no truth mistrusted, and nothing but a pure and single heart expressed. Many half-forgotten emotions were awakened in the sister's mind by this visit. It was so very long since any other visitor had crossed their threshold. It was so very long since any voice of sympathy had made sad music in her ears that the stranger's figure remained present to her hours afterwards, when she sat at the window plying her needle, and his words seemed newly spoken again and again. He had touched the spring that opened her whole life, and if she lost him for a short space, it was only among the many shapes of the one great recollection of which that life was made. Musing and working by turns, now constraining herself to be steady at her needle for a long time together, and now letting her work fall unregarded on her lap, and straying wheresoever her busier thoughts led, Harriet Carker found the hours glide by her, and the day steal on. The morning, which had been bright and clear, gradually became overcast. A sharp wind set in, and rain fell heavily, and a dark mist drooping over the distant town hid it from the view. She often looked with compassion at such a time upon the stragglers who came wandering into London by the great highway hard by, and who, footsore and weary, and gazing fearfully at the huge town before them, as if foreboding that their misery there would be but as a drop of water in the sea, or as a grain of sea sand on the shore, went shrinking on, cowering before the angry weather, and looking as if the very elements rejected them. Day after day such travellers crept past, but always, she thought, in one direction, always towards the town, swallowed up in one phase or other of its immensity, towards which they seemed impelled by a desperate fascination. They never returned. Food for the hospitals, the churchyards, the prisons, the river, fever, madness, vice, and death. They passed on to the monster roaring in the distance, and were lost. The chill wind was howling, and the rain was falling, and the day was darkening moodily, when Harriet, raising her eyes from the work on which she had long since been engaged with unremitting constancy, saw one of these travellers approaching. A woman, a solitary woman of some 30 years of age, tall, well-formed, handsome, miserably dressed, the soil of many country roads in varied weather, dust, chalk, clay, gravel, clotted on her grey cloak by the streaming wet. No bonnet on her head, nothing to defend her rich black hair from the rain, but a torn handkerchief, with a fluttering ends of which, and with her hair, the wind blinded her so that she often stopped to push them back and look upon the way she was going. She was in the act of doing so when Harriet observed her. As her hands, parting on her sunburnt forehead, swept across her face and threw aside the hindrances that encroached upon it, there was a reckless and regardless beauty in it, a dauntless and depraved indifference to more than weather, a carelessness of what was cast upon her bare head from heaven on earth, that, coupled with her misery and loneliness, touched the heart of her fellow woman. She thought of all that was perverted and debased within her, no less than without, of modest graces of the mind, hardened and steeled, like these attractions of the person, of the many gifts of the Creator flung to the winds like the wild hair, of all the beautiful ruin upon which the storm was beating and the night was coming. Thinking of this, She did not turn away with a delicate indignation. Too many of her own compassionate and tender sex too often do, but pitied her. Her fallen sister came on, looking far before her, trying with her eager eyes to pierce the mist in which the city was enshrouded, and glancing now and then from side to side with the bewildered and uncertain aspect of a stranger. Though her tread was bold and courageous, she was fatigued, and after a moment of irresolution sat down upon a heap of stones, seeking no shelter from the rain, but letting it rain on her as it would. She was now opposite the house, raising her head after resting it for a moment on both hands. Her eyes met those of Harriet. In a moment Harriet was at the door, and the other, rising from her seat at her back, came slowly, and with no conciliatory look, towards her. "Why do you rest in the rain?" said Harriet gently. "Because I have no other resting place," was the reply. "But there are many places of shelter near here. This," referring to the little porch, "is better than where you were. You are very welcome to rest here." The wanderer looked at her in doubt and surprise, but without any expression of thankfulness, and sitting down, and taking off one of her worn shoes to beat out the fragments of stone and dust that were inside, showed her that her foot was cut and bleeding. Harriet uttering an expression of pity, the traveller looked up with a contemptuous and incredulous smile. "Why, what's a torn foot to such as me?" she said. "And what's a torn foot in such as me to such as you?" "Come in and wash it," answered Harriet mildly, "and let me give you something to bind it up." The woman caught her arm, and drawing it before her own eyes, hid them against it, and wept, not like a woman, but like a stern man surprised into that weakness, with a violent heaving of her breast, and struggle for recovery, that showed how unusual the emotion was with her. She submitted to be led into the house, and evidently more in gratitude than in any care for herself, washed and bound the injured place. Harriet then put before her fragments of her own frugal dinner, and when she had eaten of them, though sparingly, besought her, before resuming her road, which she showed anxiety to do, to dry her clothes before the fire. Again, more in gratitude than with any evidence of concern in her own behalf, she sat down in front of it, and unbinding the handkerchief about her head, and letting her thick wet hair fall down below her waist, sat drying it with the palms of her hands, and looking at the blaze. "I dare say you are thinking," she said, lifting her head suddenly, "that I used to be handsome once. I believe I was. I know I was. Look here." She held up her hair roughly with both hands, seizing it as if she would have torn it out, then threw it down again, and flung it back as though it were a heap of serpents. "Are you a stranger in this place?" asked Harriet. "A stranger," she returned, stopping between each short reply, and looking at the fire. "Yes, 10 or a dozen years a stranger. I have had no almanac where I have been. 10 or a dozen years. I don't know this part. It's much altered since I went away." "Have you been far?" "Very far. Months upon months over the sea, and far away even then. I have been where convicts go," she added, looking full upon her entertainer. "I have been one myself." "Heaven help you and forgive you," was the gentle answer. "Ah, Heaven help me and forgive me," she returned, nodding her head at the fire. If man would help some of us a little more, God would forgive us all the sooner, perhaps." But she was softened by the earnest manner and the cordial face, so full of mildness and so free from judgment of her. "We may be about the same age, you and me. If I am older, it is not above a year or two. Oh, think of that." She opened her arms as though the exhibition of her outward form would show the moral wretch she was, and letting them drop at her sides, hung down her head. "There is nothing we may not hope to repair. It is never too late to amend," said Harriet. "You are penitent." "No," she answered, "I am not. I can't be. I am no such thing. Why should I be penitent, and all the world go free? They talk to me of my penitence. Who's penitent for the wrongs that have been done to me?" She rose up, bound her handkerchief about her head, and turned to move away. "Where are you going?" said Harriet. "Yonder," she answered, pointing with her hand, "to London." "Have you any home to go to?" "I think I have a mother. She's as much a mother as her dwelling is a home," she answered, with a bitter laugh. "Take this," cried Harriet, putting money in her hand. "Try to do well. It is very little, but for one day it may keep you from harm." "Are you married?" said the other, faintly, as she took it. "No, I live here with my brother. We have not so much to spare, or I would give you more." "Will you let me kiss you?" Seeing no scorn or repugnance in her face, the object of her charity bent over her as she asked the question, and pressed her lips against her cheek. Once more she caught her arm, and covered her eyes with it, and then was gone. Gone into the deepening night, and howling wind, and pelting rain, urging her way on towards the mist-enshrouded city, where the blurred lights gleamed, and with her black hair and disordered headgear fluttered round her reckless face. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34 of Dombey and Son. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Lyons. Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. Chapter 34. Another Mother and Daughter. In an ugly and dark room, an old woman, ugly and dark too, sat listening to the wind and rain, and crouching over a meagre fire, more constant to the last-named occupation than the first. She never changed her attitude, unless, when any stray drops of rain fell hissing on the smouldering embers, to raise her head with an awkward attention to the whistling and pattering outside, and gradually to let it fall again lower and lower and lower, as she sunk into a brooding state of thought, in which the noises of the night were as indistinctly regarded as is the monotonous rolling of a sea by one who sits in contemplation on its shore. There was no light in the room save that which the fire afforded. Glaring sullenly from time to time, like the eye of a fierce beast half asleep, it revealed no objects that needed to be jealous of a better display. A heap of rags, a heap of bones, a wretched bed, 2 or 3 mutilated chairs or stools, the black walls and blacker ceiling, were all its winking brightness shone upon. as the old woman, with a gigantic and distorted image of herself thrown half upon the wall behind her, half upon the roof above, sat bending over the few loose bricks within which it was pent, on the damp hearth of the chimney, for there was no stove. She looked as if she were watching at some witch's altar for a favourable token, but that the movement of her chattering jaws and trembling chin was too frequent and too fast for the slow flickering of the fire, it would have seemed an illusion wrought by the light, as it came and went, upon a face as motionless as the form to which it belonged. If Florence could have stood within the room and looked upon the original of the shadow thrown upon the wall and roof, as it cowered thus over the fire, a glance might have sufficed to recall the figure of good Mrs. Brown, notwithstanding that her childish recollection of that terrible old woman was as grotesque and exaggerated a presentment of the truth, perhaps, as the shadow on the wall. But Florence was not there to look on, and good Mrs. Brown remained unrecognised, and sat staring at her fire, unobserved. Attracted by a louder sputtering than usual, as the rain came hissing down the chimney in a little stream, the old woman raised her head impatiently to listen afresh, and this time she did not drop it again, for there was a hand upon the door and a footstep in the room. "Who's that?" she said, looking over her shoulder. "One who brings you news," was the answer, in a woman's voice. "News? Where from?" "From abroad." "From beyond seas?" cried the old woman, starting up. "Ay, from beyond seas." The old woman raked the fire together hurriedly, and going close to her visitor, who had entered and shut the door, and who now stood in the middle of the room, put her hand upon the drenched cloak, and turned the unresisting figure so as to have it in the full light of the fire. She did not find what she had expected, whatever that might be, for she let the cloak go again, and uttered a querulous cry of disappointment and misery. "What is the matter?" asked her visitor. "Oho! Oho!" cried the woman, turning her face upward with a terrible howl. "What is the matter?" asked the visitor again. "It's not my gal," cried the old woman, tossing up her arms and clasping her hands above her head. "Where's my Alice? Where's my handsome daughter? They've been the death of her." "They've not been the death of her yet, if your name's Marwood," said the visitor. "Have you seen my gal, then?" cried the old woman. "Has she wrote to me?" "She said you couldn't read," returned the other. "No more I can," exclaimed the old woman, wringing her hands. "Have you no light here?" said the other, looking round the room. The old woman, mumbling and shaking her head, and muttering to herself about her handsome daughter, brought a candle from a cupboard in the corner, and thrusting it into the fire with a trembling hand, lighted it with some difficulty and set it on the table. Its dirty wick burnt dimly at first, being choked in its own grease, and when the bleared eyes and failing sight of the old woman could distinguish anything by its light, her visitor was sitting with her arms folded, her eyes turned downwards, and a handkerchief she had worn upon her head lying on the table by her side. "She sent to me by word of mouth, then, my gal, Alice," mumbled the old woman, after waiting for some moments. "What did she say?" "Look," returned the visitor. The old woman repeated the word in a scared, uncertain way, and shading her eyes, looked at the speaker, round the room, and at the speaker once again. Alice said, "Look again, mother," and the speaker fixed her eyes upon her. Again the old woman looked round the room, and at her visitor, and round the room once more. Hastily seizing the candle, and rising from her seat, she held it to the visitor's face, uttered a loud cry, set down the light, and fell upon her neck. "It's my gal! It's my Alice! It's my handsome daughter, living and come back!" screamed the old woman, rocking herself to and fro upon the breast that coldly suffered her embrace. "It's my gal! It's my Alice! It's my handsome daughter, living and come back!" she screamed again, dropping on the floor before her, clasping her knees, laying her head against them, and still rocking herself to and fro with every frantic demonstration of which her vitality was capable. "Yes, mother," returned Alice, stooping forward for a moment and kissing her, but endeavouring, even in the act, to disengage herself from her embrace. "I am here at last. Let go, mother, let go. Get up and sit in your chair. What good does this do?" "She's come back harder than she went," cried the mother, looking up in her face, and still holding to her knees. "She don't care for me, after all these years, and all the wretched life I've led." "Why, mother," said Alice, shaking her ragged skirts to detach the old woman from them, "there are two sides to that. There have been years for me as well as you, and there have been years for me as well as you, and there has been wretchedness for me as well as you. Get up, get up." Her mother rose and cried and wrung her hands and stood at a little distance gazing on her. Then she took the candle again, and going round her, surveyed her from head to foot, making a low moaning all the time. Then she put the candle down, resumed her chair, and, beating her hands together to a kind of weary tune, and rolling herself from side to side, continued moaning and wailing to herself. Alice got up, took off her wet cloak, and laid it aside. That done, she sat down as before, and, with her arms folded and her eyes gazing at the fire, remained silently listening with a contemptuous face to her old mother's inarticulate complainings. "Did you expect to see me return as youthful as I went away, mother?" she said at length, turning her eyes upon the old woman. "Did you think a foreign life like mine was good for good looks? One would believe so to hear you." "It ain't that," cried the mother. "She knows it." "What is it then?" returned the daughter. "It had best be something that don't last, mother, or my way out is easier than my way in." "Hear that!" exclaimed the mother. "After all these years she threatens to desert me in the moment of her coming back again." "I tell you, mother, for the second time, there have been years for me as well as you," said Alice. "Come back harder? Of course I have come back harder. What did you expect?" "Harder to me, to her own dear mother!" cried the old woman. "I don't know who began to harden me, if my own dear mother didn't," she returned, sitting with her folded arms and knitted brows, and compressed lips, as if she were bent on excluding, by force, every softer feeling from her breast. "Listen, mother, to a word or two. If we understand each other now, we shall not fall out any more, perhaps. I went away a girl, and have come back a woman. I went away undutiful enough, and have come back no better, you may swear. But have you been very dutiful to me?" "I?" cried the old woman. "To my gal? A mother dutiful to her own child?" "It sounds unnatural, don't it?" returned the daughter, looking coldly on her with her stern, regardless, hearty, beautiful face. "But I have thought of it sometimes in the course of my lone years, till I have got used to it. I have heard some talk about duty first and last, but it has always been of my duty to other people. I have wondered now and then, to pass away the time, whether no one ever owed any duty to me." Her mother sat mowing and mumbling, and shaking her head, but whether angrily or remorsefully, or in denial, or only in her physical infirmity, did not appear. "There was a child called Alice Marwood," said the daughter, with a laugh, and looking down at herself in terrible derision of herself, "born among poverty and neglect, and nursed in it. Nobody taught her, nobody stepped forward to help her, nobody cared for her." "Nobody!" echoed the mother, pointing to herself and striking her breast. "The only care she knew," returned the daughter, "was to be beaten, and stinted, and abused sometimes, and she might have done better without that. She lived in homes like this, and in the streets, with a crowd of little wretches like herself, and yet she brought good looks out of this childhood. So much the worse for her. She had better have been hunted and worried to death for ugliness." "Go on, go on!" exclaimed the mother. "I am going on," returned the daughter. "There was a girl called Alice Marwood. She was handsome. She was taught too late, and taught all wrong. She was too well cared for, too well trained, too well helped on, too much looked after. You were very fond of her. You were better off then. What came to that girl comes to thousands every year. It was only ruin, and she was born to it." "After all these years," whined the old woman, "my gal begins with this?" "She'll soon have ended," said the daughter. "There was a criminal called Alice Marwood, a girl still, but deserted and an outcast, and she was tried, and she was sentenced. And Lord, how the gentlemen in the court talked about it, and how grave the judge was on her duty, and on her having perverted the gifts of nature, as if he didn't know better than anybody there that they had been made curses to her. And how he preached about the strong arm of the law, so very strong to save her, when she was an innocent and helpless little wretch, and how solemn and religious it all was. I have thought of that many times since, to be sure." She folded her arms tightly on her breast, and laughed in a tone that made the howl of the old woman musical. "So Alice Marwood was transported, mother," she pursued, "and was sent to learn her duty, where there was 20 times less duty and more wickedness and wrong and infamy than here. And Alice Marwood is come back a woman, such a woman as she ought to be after all this. In good time there will be more solemnity, and more fine talk, and more strong arm, more likely, and there will be an end of her. But the gentleman needn't be afraid of being thrown out of work. There's crowds of little wretches, boy and girl, growing up in any of the streets they live in, that'll keep them to it till they've made their fortunes." The old woman leaned her elbows on the table, and resting her face upon her 2 hands, made a show of being in great distress, or really was, perhaps. "There, I have done, mother," said the daughter, with a motion of her head, as if in dismissal of the subject. "I have said enough. Don't let you and I talk of being dutiful, whatever we do. Your childhood was like mine, I suppose. So much the worse for both of us. I don't want to blame you, or to defend myself. Why should I? That's all over long ago. But I am a woman, not a girl now, and you and I needn't make a show of our history, like the gentleman in the court. We know all about it well enough." Lost and degraded as she was, there was a beauty in her, both of face and form, which, even in its worst expression, could not but be recognized as such by anyone regarding her with the least attention. As she subsided into silence, and her face, which had been harshly agitated, quieted down, while her dark eyes, fixed upon the fire, exchanged the reckless light that had animated them, for one that was softened by something like sorrow, there shone through all her wayworn misery and fatigue a ray of the departed radiance of the fallen angel. Her mother, after watching her for some time without speaking, ventured to steal her withered hand a little nearer to her across the table, and finding that she permitted this, to touch her face and smooth her hair. With the feeling, as it seemed, that the old woman was at least sincere in this show of interest, Alice made no movement to check her. So, advancing by degrees, she bound up her daughter's hair afresh, took off her wet shoes, if they deserved the name, spread something dry upon her shoulders, and hovered humbly about her, muttering to herself as she recognised her old features and expression more and more. "You are very poor, mother, I see," said Alice, looking round, when she had sat thus for some time. "Bitter poor, my dearie," replied the old woman. She admired her daughter, and was afraid of her. Perhaps her admiration, such as it was, had originated long ago, when she first found anything that was beautiful appearing in the midst of the squalid fight of her existence. Perhaps her fear was referable, in some sort, to the retrospect she had so lately heard. Be this as it might, she stood, submissively and deferentially, before her child, and inclined her head, as if in a pitiful entreaty to be spared any further reproach. "How have you lived?" "By begging, my dearie." "And pilfering, mother?" "Sometimes." "Ally, in a very small way. I am old and timid. I have taken trifles from children now and then, my dearie, but not often. I have tramped about the country, pet, and I know what I know. I have watched." "Watched?" returned the daughter, looking at her. "I have hung about a family, my dearie," said the mother, even more humbly and submissively than before. "What family?" "Hush, darling, don't be angry with me. I did it for the love of you, in memory of my poor gal beyond seas." She put out her hand deprecatingly, and drawing it back again, laid it on her lips. "Years ago, my dearie," she pursued, glancing timidly at the attentive and stern face opposed to her, "I came across his little child by chance." "Whose child?" "Not his, Alice, dearie. Don't look at me like that. Not his. How could it be his? You know he has none." "Whose then?" returned the daughter. "You said his." "Hush, Ally, you frighten me, dearie. Mr Dombey's. Only Mr Dombey's. Since then, darling, I have seen them often. I have seen him." In uttering this last word, the old woman shrunk and recoiled, as if with a sudden fear that her daughter would strike her. But though the daughter's face was fixed upon her, and expressed the most vehement passion, she remained still, except that she clenched her arms tighter and tighter within each other on her bosom, as if to restrain them by that means from doing an injury to herself or someone else, in the blind fury of the wrath that suddenly possessed her. "Little he thought who I was," said the old woman, shaking her clenched hand. "And little he cared," muttered her daughter between her teeth. "But there we were," said the old woman, "face to face. I spoke to him, and he spoke to me. I sat and watched him as he went away down a long grove of trees, and at every step he took I cursed him soul and body." "He will thrive in spite of that," returned the daughter disdainfully. "Ay, he is thriving," said the mother. She held her peace, for the face and form before her were unshaped by rage. It seemed as if the bosom would burst with the emotions that strove within it. The effort that constrained and held it pent up was no less formidable than the rage itself, no less bespeaking the violent and dangerous character of the woman who made it. But it succeeded, and she asked, after a silence, "Is he married?" "No, dearie," said the mother. "Going to be?" "Not that I know of, dearie. But his master and friend is married. Oh, we may give him joy. We may give 'em all joy," cried the old woman, hugging herself with her lean arms in her exultation. "Nothing but joy to us will come of that marriage, mind me." The daughter looked at her for an explanation. "But you are wet and tired, hungry and thirsty," said the old woman, hobbling to the cupboard, "and there's little here, and little," diving down into her pocket and jingling a few halfpence on the table, "little here. Have you any money, Alice, dearie?" The covetous, sharp, eager face with which she asked the question and looked on, as her daughter took out of her bosom the little gift she had so lately received, told almost as much of the history of this parent and child as the child herself had told in words. "Is that all?" said the mother. "I have no more. I should not have this but for charity." "But for charity, dearie?" said the old woman, bending greedily over the table to look at the money, which she appeared distrustful of her daughter's still retaining in her hand, and gazing on. "Humph! 6 and 6 is 12, and 6 18, so we must make the most of it. I'll go buy something to eat and drink." With greater alacrity than might have been expected in one of her appearance, for age and misery seemed to have made her as decrepit as ugly, she began to occupy her trembling hands in tying an old bonnet on her head, and folding a tall shawl about herself, still eyeing the money in her daughter's hand with the same sharp desire. "What joy is to come to us of this marriage, mother?" asked the daughter. "You have not told me that." "The joy," she replied, attiring herself with fumbling fingers, "of no love at all, and much pride and hate, my dearie. The joy of confusion and strife among 'em, proud as they are, and of danger. Danger, Alice." "What danger?" "I have seen what I have seen. I know what I know," chuckled the mother. "Let some look to it. Let some be upon their guard. My gal may keep good company yet." Then, seeing that in the wondering earnestness with which her daughter regarded her, her hand involuntarily closed upon the money, the old woman made more speed to secure it, and hurriedly added, "I'll go buy something. I'll go buy something." As she stood with her hand stretched out before her daughter, glancing again at the money, put it to her lips before parting with it. "What, Ally? Do you kiss it?" chuckled the old woman. "That's like me. I often do. Oh, it's so good to us," squeezing her own tarnished halfpence up to her bag of a throat. "So good to us in everything, but not coming home in heaps." "I kiss it, mother," said the daughter. "Or I did then. I don't know that I ever did before, for the giver's sake." "The giver, dearie?" retorted the old woman, whose dimmed eyes glistened as she took it. "Aye, I'll kiss it for the giver's sake too, when the giver can make it go farther. But I'll go spend it, dearie. I'll be back directly." "You seem to say you know a great deal, mother," said the daughter, following her to the door with her eyes. "You have grown very wise since we parted." "No," croaked the old woman, coming back a step or two. "I know more than you think. I know more than he thinks, dearie, as I'll tell you by and by. I know all about him." The daughter smiled incredulously. "I know of his brother, Alice," said the old woman, stretching out her neck with a leer of malice absolutely frightful, "who might have been where you have been, for stealing money, and who lives with his sister over yonder, by the North Road out of London." "Where?" "By the North Road out of London, dearie. You shall see the house if you like. It ain't much to boast of, genteel as his own is." "No, no, no," cried the old woman, shaking her head and laughing, for her daughter had started up. "Not now. It's too far off. It's by the milestone, where the stones are heaped. To-morrow, dearie, if it's fine, and you are in the humour. But I'll go spend—" "Stop!" And the daughter flung herself upon her with her former passion raging like a fire. "The sister is a fair-faced devil with brown hair?" The old woman, amazed and terrified, nodded her head. "I see the shadow of him in her face. It's a red house standing by itself. Before the door there is a small green porch." Again the old woman nodded. "In which I sat to-day. Give me back the money." "Alice, dearie!" "Give me back the money, or you'll be hurt." She forced it from the old woman's hand as she spoke, and, utterly indifferent to her complainings and entreaties, threw on the garments she had taken off, and hurried out with headlong speed. The mother followed, limping after her as she could, and expostulating with no more effect upon her than upon the wind and rain and darkness that encompassed them. Obdurate and fierce in her own purpose, and indifferent to all besides, the daughter defied the weather and the distance, as if she had known no travel or fatigue, and made for the house where she had been relieved. After some quarter of an hour's walking, the old woman, spent and out of breath, ventured to hold her skirts, but she ventured no more, and they travelled on in silence through the wet and gloom. If the mother now and then uttered a word of complaint, she stifled it, lest her daughter should break away from her and leave her behind, and the daughter was dumb. It was within an hour or so of midnight when they left the regular streets behind them, and entered on the deeper gloom of that neutral ground where the house was situated. The town lay in the distance, lurid and lowering. The bleak wind howled over the open space. All around was black, wild, desolate. "This is a fit place for me," said the daughter, stopping to look back. "I thought so, when I was here before, to-day." "Alice, my dearie!" cried the mother, pulling her gently by the skirt. "Alice!" "What now, mother?" "Don't give the money back, my darling. Please don't. We can't afford it. We want supper, dearie. Money is money, whoever gives it. Say what you will, but keep the money." "See there," was all the daughter's answer. "That is the house, I mean. Is that it?" The old woman nodded in the affirmative, and a few more paces brought them to the threshold. There was the light of fire and candle in the room where Alice had sat to dry her clothes, and on her knocking at the door, John Carker appeared from that room. He was surprised to see such visitors at such an hour, and asked Alice what she wanted. "I want your sister," she said, "the woman who gave me money to-day." At the sound of her raised voice, Harriet came out. "Oh," said Alice, "you are here. Do you remember me?" "Yes," she answered, wondering. The face that had humbled itself before her looked on her now with such invincible hatred and defiance, and the hand that had gently touched her arm was clenched with such a show of evil purpose as if it would gladly strangle her, that she drew close to her brother for protection. "That I could speak with you, and not know you. that I could come near you and not feel what blood was running in your veins by the tingling of my own," said Alice, with a menacing gesture. "What do you mean? What have I done?" "Done?" returned the other. "You have sat me by your fire. You have given me food and money. You have bestowed your compassion on me, you whose name I spit upon." The old woman, with a malevolence that made her ugliness quite awful, shook her withered hand at the brother and sister in confirmation of her daughter, but plucked her by the skirts again, nevertheless, imploring her to keep the money. "If I dropped a tear upon your hand, may it wither it up. If I spoke a gentle word in your hearing, may it deafen you. If I touched you with my lips, may the touch be poison to you. A curse upon this roof that gave me shelter. Sorrow and shame upon your head. Ruin upon all belonging to you." As she said the words, she threw the money down upon the ground, and spurned it with her foot. "I tread it in the dust. I wouldn't take it if it paved my way to heaven. I would the bleeding foot that brought me here today had rotted off before it led me to your house." Harriet, pale and trembling, restrained her brother, and suffered her to go on uninterrupted. "It was well that I should be pitied and forgiven by you, or any one of your name, in the first hour of my return. It was well that you should act the kind good lady to me. I'll thank you when I die. I'll pray for you and all your race, you may be sure." With a fierce action of her hand, as if she sprinkled hatred on the ground, and with it devoted those who were standing there to destruction, she looked up once at the black sky and strode out into the wild night. The mother, who had plucked at her skirts again and again in vain, and had eyed the money lying on the threshold with an absorbing greed that seemed to concentrate her faculties upon it, would have prowled about until the house was dark, and then groped in the mire on the chance of repossessing herself of it. But the daughter drew her away, and they set forth straight on their return to their dwelling, the old woman whimpering and bemoaning their loss upon the road, and fretfully bewailing, as openly as she dared, the undutiful conduct of her handsome girl in depriving her of a supper on the very first night of their reunion. Supperless to bed she went, saving for a few coarse fragments, and those she sat mumbling and munching over a scrap of fire long after her undutiful daughter lay asleep. Were this miserable mother and this miserable daughter only the reduction to their lowest grade of certain social vices sometimes prevailing higher up? In this round world of many circles within circles, do we make a weary journey from the high grade to the low, to find at last that they lie close together, that the two extremes touch, and that our journey's end is but our starting place? Allowing for great difference of stuff and texture, was the pattern of this woof repeated among gentle blood at all? Say, Edith Dombey, and Cleopatra, best of mothers, let us have your testimony. End of chapter 34.